The candlelight flickered softly against the antique wooden tables at Ljardanskree, a French bistro tucked away on a quiet street in Paris. The jazz music played low in the background, its smooth rhythm blending with the faint sounds of clinking silverware and murmurs of conversation. The smell of seared duck breast and freshly baked baguettes filled the air, making my stomach growl despite my nerves. I sat across from my father-in-law, Robert Lefebvre, a towering figure in the luxury fashion industry, his reputation preceding him wherever he went. Next to him sat Julien Dufresne, a Parisian designer with a quiet but unmistakable air of sophistication. They were discussing an upcoming collaboration, some new couture line that would be launched in collaboration with a celebrity. I pretended to focus on the escargot in front of me, pushing the slippery morsels around on my plate. But in truth, I wasn't paying attention to their conversation at all. I was too busy trying to appear interested while feeling more and more like an outsider in their world. Il ne comprend rien, Robert said to Julien, his tone dismissive as he gestured toward me. This young man is just here to smile and nod. He doesn't even understand fashion. I felt my heart tighten in my chest. My fork stopped midair, my hand trembling slightly as I set it down gently on the plate. Robert's words stung more than I could have ever expected. He thought I wasn't listening, that I wasn't capable of understanding. But the thing is, I did understand. Every single word. I had grown up in a household where French wasn't just a language, it was a part of who I was. My mother, Eleanor Hartley, was French-American, and she made sure we honored our heritage, speaking French at home. I had spent my childhood listening to stories in French, and by the time I was 12, I could understand it fluently. I had kept this part of my life hidden, though, at least from Emma's family. When we first met, it never seemed important to mention. Emma, my wife, and I had bonded over shared interests in design and construction. But when it came to her father, I always felt like I was playing a role. I was Emma's safe choice, her reliable, hardworking husband, exactly what her father expected, but never quite the person Robert wanted me to be. The person he thought I should be. I sat there in silence, forcing a smile, while inside I felt my chest tighten. For 4 years, I had believed that I was building a life with Emma based on mutual respect and love. But now, in the quiet of that bistro, it all came crashing down. I was just a figure in the background of their world, a convenient accessory. Robert and Julien continued their conversation in French, oblivious to the fact that I understood every word they were saying. I felt like I had been placed in a box, a role I could never escape from. This wasn't my world, not truly. I had always felt like I was in the shadows of the more glamorous world Emma and her family inhabited. But now, as Robert casually insulted me right in front of my face, I realized how little I really mattered in his eyes. I had been living in a comfortable lie, and it was time to face the truth. I didn't belong here. Not in this room, not in this family, and certainly not in a marriage where I had to play a part rather than be seen for who I truly was. I placed my fork down slowly, trying to steady my breath. The truth had hit me harder than I could have imagined. I couldn't shake the feeling of discomfort as the dinner continued. The clinking of glasses and the sound of laughter swirling around me like a cloud I couldn't escape. The words Robert had said echoed in my mind, and no matter how hard I tried to push them away, they stuck with me like a splinter under my skin. The whole evening felt like a performance I was forced to play a part in. I had been so careful for the past few years to blend into Emma's world, to be the supportive husband, the steady and reliable one, all while maintaining my place in the shadows of the life her family had built. But tonight, everything felt different. That brief, careless remark had stripped away the layers of illusion I had built, and I realized I wasn't just an outsider. I was someone whose presence was barely acknowledged except for what I could offer, a prop. Nothing more. When Emma excused herself to go to the restroom, Robert and Julien kept talking, their conversation turning more business-focused. My attention waned as I slowly pushed the food around my plate, barely able to bring myself to eat. They were talking about a collaboration, a new line of couture, and it all felt so distant, so irrelevant to my life. But then again, was my life ever really part of theirs? I couldn't help but glance over at Robert. There he was, sitting with a calm, confident air, his every word measured, his opinions sharp. It was obvious to me now. He had always seen me as a side character in the story of his daughter's life, someone who didn't belong to his world but was merely a placeholder. I had always known he didn't fully approve of me. But this was the truth, laid out right in front of me, and it hit harder than I ever expected. It wasn't about the job I had or the career I was building. It wasn't even about the things I could offer him. What he wanted was someone who fit his narrow definition of success, someone with more power, more influence, more ambition. I suddenly realized that I had spent the past 4 years trying to fit into this world that didn't want me, trying to play a part in a story that wasn't mine to tell. What had I even been doing? Trying to prove something to Robert? Trying to win his approval? In all that time, I had neglected what mattered most, me. I hadn't been honest with myself about my role in Emma's life or in her family's world. When Emma returned to the table, she slid into her seat, her eyes sparkling with excitement, completely unaware of the shift that had taken place in the room. Her smile was bright, but I saw it now for what it was, a mask, the same one I had been wearing for so long. I smiled back at her, but my heart wasn't in it. I couldn't go on pretending anymore, not when the truth had been so brutally laid bare. This wasn't just about her father's words. It was about everything I had been ignoring in our marriage, everything I had chosen to overlook to keep the peace. I had let myself become invisible in our relationship, and in doing so, I had lost myself. The rest of the meal passed in a blur. I barely heard the conversation, my mind racing with 1,000 thoughts. After dessert, I excused myself from the table, telling them I needed some fresh air. As I stepped out into the cool Parisian night, I felt a deep sense of loneliness wash over me. It wasn't the kind of loneliness that comes from being alone, but the kind that settles in when you realize you've been living a lie for far too long. I needed to make a change. I didn't know what that change would look like yet, but I knew one thing for sure. I couldn't keep living for other people. I had to start living for myself. I had to stop pretending to be someone I wasn't, just to make others comfortable. The cold Parisian air hit me the moment I stepped outside the bistro, and for a second, I was grateful for the clarity it brought. The streets of the city seemed to hum with life, but I was numb, lost in my thoughts, struggling to make sense of what had just happened inside. I walked aimlessly down the cobblestone streets, not knowing where I was going, only that I needed distance from that dinner, from Robert's words that had shattered everything I had believed about myself. The city's lights glowed warmly in the distance, but I couldn't shake the bitter taste in my mouth. It wasn't just the fact that Robert had insulted me. It was that it had been so casually done, as though my worth was something he could simply dismiss without consequence. I wandered for what felt like hours, passing by cafes and boutiques, the noise of the city rising and falling around me, until I finally found myself standing at the edge of the Seine. The river reflected the lights of the city, and for a moment I just stared at the water, trying to calm the storm inside me. How had I let things get this far? How had I convinced myself that being part of Emma's world was enough, when all along I knew it wasn't? The truth, no matter how painful, had been sitting there, waiting for me to see it. When Emma and I first met, I thought I had found something real. She was beautiful, smart, and full of life, and I felt like I could finally be part of a world that had always seemed so distant from my own. I wasn't from wealth or privilege. I had earned everything I had through hard work. But being with Emma, I convinced myself that I could be accepted into her world, that maybe, just maybe, I could belong. But now, as I stood there on the banks of the Seine, I realized how naive I had been. Robert had made it clear that I would never truly belong in their world, no matter how much I tried to fit in. I pulled my phone out of my pocket and checked the time. It was getting late. Emma had probably finished her conversation with Julian and was wondering where I had gone. But the thought of going back to the bistro, back to that table where Robert's words still echoed, made me feel sick. I couldn't go back to that. Not yet. Not until I had figured out what to do next. The truth was, I hadn't just been living for Robert's approval. I had been living for Emma's approval too. I had spent so much time trying to be the man I thought she wanted me to be that I had forgotten who I was. I had buried my own dreams, my own desires, to fit into a life that was never meant for me. And now, stand there by the river, I realized that I couldn't do that anymore. I couldn't keep living like that, pretending to be someone I wasn't, just to make everyone else happy. It was time for me to take control of my life, to stop living in the shadow of other people's expectations. I thought about the life I had built for myself before Emma and her family had come into the picture. I had always loved architecture, and I had worked hard to get to where I was in my career. But somehow, over the years, I had let that part of me fade into the background, pushing it aside for the sake of a marriage that had never truly been about what I wanted. I wasn't just working for the sake of a paycheck. I had a passion for creating something that would last, for building structures that told a story, that meant something. And yet somehow I had lost sight of that passion. I knew what I needed to do. I couldn't go back to the life I had been living, pretending that everything was fine when it clearly wasn't. I needed to start over. I needed to make a choice for myself. But that choice wasn't going to be easy. Leaving Emma wouldn't just be about walking away from a marriage. It would be about walking away from everything I had known for the past 4 years. It would mean stepping out of the life I had built with her, the life I thought I wanted, and facing the uncertainty of what came next. But I couldn't keep living a lie. I couldn't keep pretending that I was okay when deep down, I knew I wasn't. As I stood there on the riverbank, I felt a strange sense of clarity. The decision wasn't going to be easy, and I didn't have all the answers. But for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was finally starting to see things for what they truly were. I needed to find my own path, to pursue the life I had set aside for too long. And maybe, just maybe, it was time to stop living in the shadows and start living for myself. I turned around, heading back toward the bistro, but this time, I wasn't just walking to return to Emma. I was walking to face the truth, to begin the journey of reclaiming my life. And I knew that whatever happened next, it would be the first step toward building something real, something that was mine. I walked back to the bistro with a heavy heart, the weight of my thoughts pressing down on me with each step. I had no idea how I was going to face Emma or Robert after everything that had just happened, but there was no turning back now. I needed to confront the truth about them, about me, and about what my life had become. The streets of Paris seemed unfamiliar, the vibrant city lights now feeling more like a blur than the romantic backdrop they once were. My mind was racing, but the one thing that kept repeating in my head was the simple realization that I had been living someone else's version of my life. It wasn't enough to just be Emma's husband or to be part of Robert's world. I needed something more. I needed to find my own place in this world. When I arrived at Ljardanskree, I could see Emma and Robert in the window. They were still sitting at the table, talking, as if nothing had happened. Emma was laughing at something Robert had said, her head tilted back in that way she always did when she found something funny. I wanted to feel comforted by that laugh, to believe that everything could go back to normal. But I couldn't. The laughter sounded hollow to me now. It was a mask, a perfect, polished act to hide the truth beneath it. I stood there for a moment, unsure of whether I should go in. I could feel the tension rising in my chest, the anxiety of what was to come. But there was no more pretending, no more avoiding the truth. I pushed the door open and stepped inside, my heart pounding in my chest as I walked toward the table. Emma looked up, her smile fading the moment she saw my face. "Lucas, where did you go?" she asked, her voice soft but laced with concern. I sat down without answering, staring at my hands on the table. I wasn't sure how to begin or even what I wanted to say, but I knew one thing. I couldn't keep hiding from this. I couldn't keep pretending that everything was fine when it clearly wasn't. "Emma," I finally said, my voice tight, "I need to talk to you." Robert glanced between the two of us, sensing the shift in the air. "If you're going to bring up business, now might not be the best time," he said with a dry chuckle. But his voice lacked its usual authority. This time, it was almost as if he was trying to play it off, avoiding confrontation. "No, Robert," I said, looking him in the eye for the first time all evening. "This isn't about business. It's about me. It's about what I overheard you say earlier." Emma's expression shifted, confusion flickering in her eyes. "What do you mean?" she asked, but I could see the faint trace of worry on her face. "I mean," I continued, my voice calm but firm, "that I overheard you talking about me, about how I'm not qualified enough for you, how I'm not the kind of man you expected Emma to marry." There was a brief moment of silence. Emma's eyes widened, and I could see the color drain from her face as she looked at her father, who was now glaring at me. Robert didn't say anything, but his stiff posture told me everything I needed to know. He knew exactly what I was talking about. "You're right," I went on, the words tumbling out now, gaining momentum. "I've spent so much time trying to fit into a life that's not mine, trying to be something I'm not. I've ignored who I really am just to keep the peace, and I can't do that anymore." Emma looked at me, searching my face. "Lucas, what are you saying?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. I took a deep breath, finally meeting her gaze. "I'm saying I can't keep living in the shadow of someone else's expectations. I'm not the man your father wants me to be, and I've spent far too long trying to be something I'm not. I've been pretending for so long that I lost sight of who I really am. I've given up on myself to try and fit into a world that doesn't accept me for who I am." Tears welled up in Emma's eyes, and I could see the hurt on her face. "Lucas, don't say that. You mean so much to me. This isn't just about what my father thinks. It's about us. You're everything to me." I shook my head slowly. "Emma, I can't keep pretending. I've been so focused on what everyone else wants from me that I forgot to ask myself what I want. I've lost myself in this marriage, and I can't keep living like this. I'm sorry, but I think it's time for us to face the truth." She stared at me, speechless for a moment before her lips trembled. "You're leaving?" "I think it's the only way forward," I said quietly. "I need to find my own path, Emma. I need to rebuild my life, find out who I really am again. I've been so caught up in trying to fit into a life that isn't mine. But I can't do that anymore. I need to be true to myself, even if it means walking away." Robert didn't speak, but I could feel the weight of his gaze on me. Emma reached out, her hand trembling as she touched mine. "Lucas, please don't do this. We can work through this. We can fix it." I squeezed her hand gently, but there was no turning back. I can't fix something that was never real to begin with. I have to find my own way. With that, I stood up from the table, my heart heavy with the decision I had just made. The door to the bistro seemed to open with a finality I couldn't ignore. As I walked out into the night, I took a deep breath, knowing that while the road ahead was uncertain, it was mine to walk. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was finally taking control of my life. The days after the dinner were a blur. I stayed in a small hotel in Paris, just a few blocks away from the bistro. Emma tried calling me multiple times, but I couldn't bring myself to pick up the phone. I knew what she would say. She would beg me to come back, to work things out, to fix everything we'd built together. But how could I go back to something that wasn't real? How could I go back to living in a world where I was never truly seen for who I was? I wasn't ready to hear her pleadings, not yet. Not when I was still reeling from the truth that had come crashing down on me so suddenly. I spent most of the days walking through the city, trying to find a sense of peace that had eluded me for so long. Paris was beautiful, but it felt foreign now, even though it had been my home for the last few years. The city that once felt full of promise now felt suffocating, as though the weight of all my unspoken truths had been pressed into every corner of this place. The more I thought about it, the more I realized how much I had buried within myself to try to fit into Emma's world. I had left so much of me behind, just to please everyone else. One afternoon, I found myself sitting at a cafe near the Champs-Élysées, staring at my phone. I had an unread message from my brother, Ryan. He had always been my sounding board, the one person who didn't care about appearances or what was expected of me. He was the one person who would tell me the truth, even when it was the hardest thing to hear. I opened the message. "You okay, Luke? Haven't heard from you in a few days. Want to talk?" I stared at the screen for a long moment. I knew Ryan was probably the only person who would understand what I was going through. I needed someone who wouldn't judge me or tell me I was being impulsive. I needed someone who would simply listen without trying to fix things right away. I tapped out a quick reply. Yeah, I'm here. Just been figuring things out. It wasn't a lie. I had been figuring things out, but it was hard to admit to myself how much I was struggling. The truth was, I felt like I was falling apart in slow motion. I had made the decision to leave Emma, to walk away from the life I thought I wanted, but I had no idea what was next. I didn't know what kind of life I was supposed to build, and the uncertainty terrified me. Ryan's reply came quickly. I'm glad you reached out. I'll be in Paris in a couple of days. We can grab a drink, talk things through. You don't have to go through this alone. I felt a rush of relief wash over me. It was exactly what I needed. Someone who understood me, who wasn't caught up in the expectations of my marriage or my life with Emma. Ryan was the one person who could help me make sense of everything, even if it meant admitting I had no idea what I was doing. 2 days later, Ryan arrived in Paris, and we met at a bar in the Latin Quarter. The moment I saw him, I felt the tension in my shoulders ease. He was the same as always. Casual, no pretensions, just the brother I had always known. We sat down with our beers, and I immediately started talking, spilling everything I had been feeling. The anger, the disappointment, the confusion, the sense of being completely lost. Luke, Ryan said after a long pause, it sounds like you're doing exactly what you need to do. This, what you've been living, wasn't right for you. You've been pushing yourself into a mold that wasn't made for you, and now you're breaking out of it. I get how hard it is, but you're not making a mistake. I shook my head, unsure. I don't know, Ryan. I thought I had it all figured out. I thought this life with Emma, this whole world I was part of, was what I wanted. But now, I don't even recognize myself anymore. I don't know who I am without all that. Ryan leaned back, studying me with a thoughtful expression. You're the same person you've always been, Luke. You just haven't been allowed to be him. You've been wearing someone else's mask, someone else's expectations. The real you, he's been buried under all of that for so long. But you're still there. You just need to find him again. His words hit me like a wave. I had been so focused on playing a part in Emma's life that I had forgotten about my own. I had lost touch with the parts of myself that had always mattered, the parts of me that had dreams, desires, and a vision for the future. And now I was standing on the edge of that future, terrified to take the first step. You're right, I said quietly, taking a long sip of my beer. I've been so busy trying to be what everyone else wanted me to be that I forgot to ask myself what I wanted. I've been living someone else's life, and it's time to stop. Ryan nodded, his expression softening. It's not going to be easy, but you've got the courage to do this. You've got the courage to be yourself, and that's the hardest part. I felt a weight lift off my chest. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel so alone in this journey. Talking to Ryan, hearing his perspective, gave me the clarity I needed. I wasn't running away from something. I was running toward something better. I was running toward a life that would finally be mine. The night went on, but I felt lighter, as though a fog had been lifted. Maybe I didn't know exactly what was coming next, but for the first time, I felt ready to find out. Whatever it was, I would face it on my own terms. The next few days felt like a blur of clarity and uncertainty mixed together. I stayed in Paris, trying to give myself space to think, but also trying to avoid confronting Emma too soon. Her calls still came every day, and each time I saw her name on my phone, I felt a pang of guilt. She didn't deserve the pain I was causing her, but I couldn't keep pretending. I couldn't keep pretending that everything was fine when it wasn't. I spent my days walking the streets of Paris, visiting museums, sitting in cafes, and trying to regain a sense of self that had been buried under the weight of my marriage. I had always been passionate about architecture, about building something that lasted. I had never fully explored that side of myself, though. The job I had taken to support Emma and fit into her world had never been enough to ignite that spark. And now, as I wandered the beautiful streets of Paris, I found myself craving something more. Something real. One afternoon, as I walked past a small bookshop, I spotted a familiar title in the window, a book about the architecture of Paris, something I had studied in college but had forgotten in the years since. I stepped inside, the musty smell of old pages filling the air, and pulled the book off the shelf. As I flipped through its pages, I felt a sense of excitement rising in me, the same excitement I had felt years ago when I first started studying architecture. This was the part of me that had always been there, waiting to be rediscovered. The part of me that I had buried under the weight of expectations. It was still alive, still waiting for me to reclaim it. I sat down in the back of the shop, reading for hours, losing myself in the designs of buildings, the history of the city, and the dreams of those who had shaped it. I realized, as the hours slipped by, that I had been running from my own dreams for so long. I had allowed myself to be consumed by the expectations of others, first my family, then Emma, and now Robert. But in that moment, surrounded by the pages of that book, I remembered who I was. I remembered the excitement I had felt when I first realized that I could build something that mattered, something real. By the time I left the bookshop, I knew what I needed to do. I had to leave Paris, but not because I was running away from Emma. I had to leave because I was running towards something I had neglected for far too long, myself. I had spent years measuring my worth by other people's standards. But now, it was time to measure it by my own. I needed to rebuild my life, one that was true to who I was, one where I wasn't living in someone else's shadow. That night, I went to a small bar in the Latin Quarter to meet with Julien Dufresne, the Parisian designer, who had offered me a chance to work with him on a new project. Julien had been one of the few people who had seen something in me that no one else had. He had recognized the value in my understanding of both construction and design, the bridge between the two worlds. And I realized that, maybe for the first time in my life, I wasn't just playing a role in someone else's vision. I was being offered a chance to create something of my own. When I met Julien, I felt a sense of calm wash over me. The uncertainty I had been carrying for so long didn't feel so heavy anymore. I was still unsure of where the road ahead would take me, but I no longer feared it. I had spent so long trying to make everyone else happy, trying to meet their expectations, that I had forgotten what made me happy. And now I was finally starting to listen to that voice again. We sat down, and Julien immediately got to the point. "I'm glad you came," he said, his eyes studying me intently. "I know you've been through a lot lately, but I want you to know that I believe in what you can bring to the table. The opportunity I'm offering you, it's not just about the project. It's about you finding your place in this world." His words hit me harder than I expected. "I'm ready for that," I said, finally feeling the weight of his offer. "I'm ready to build something that's mine, something that matters." Julien smiled, and for the first time in days, I felt a sense of purpose. The path ahead was still uncertain, but for the first time, I didn't feel lost. I had no idea what would come next, but I knew it would be different. It had to be. It was time for me to rebuild, not just my career, but my life. I left the bar that night with a renewed sense of clarity. I wasn't sure what the future held, but I was no longer afraid of it. I was done living someone else's life. Now, it was my turn to live for myself. I woke up the next morning with a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in years. The city outside my window was quiet, the streets still bathed in the soft morning light of Paris. But for the first time in a long while, I felt like I was finally awake. Not just physically, but emotionally. I had made a decision, one that was going to change everything, and the weight of it didn't feel as heavy as I had expected. It felt freeing. I spent the morning packing my things. The room I'd been staying in at the small hotel now felt like a temporary shelter, a place to regroup, but not a place I belonged. I had no idea where I was going next, but I knew I couldn't stay in Paris, at least not for the life I had been living before. I had to move forward, to create something new. As I packed, my phone buzzed on the nightstand. I picked it up, expecting another message from Emma, but it wasn't her name that flashed on the screen. It was Robert's. My stomach tightened as I read the message. "I need to speak with you. When you have a moment." I stared at the screen for a long time, unsure of what to do. Robert had been a constant presence in my life since I'd married Emma, and the thought of facing him now was daunting. I wasn't sure what he wanted to talk about, but I knew it wasn't going to be easy. He wasn't the kind of man who reached out unless there was something important at stake. I took a deep breath and replied, "I'll meet you." I didn't want to meet him, Didn't want to deal with the man who had made me feel like I was never enough. But there was something I had to do, something I had to face before I could fully move on. I owed it to myself. I owed it to Emma, too, in a way. I arranged to meet Robert at a cafe near his office in the 16th arrondissement, a place where we had once met for business talks. The setting was familiar, but this time, it felt different. I wasn't the same man who had once sat across from him, eager to please and desperate for approval. I wasn't that man anymore. When I arrived, Robert was already seated at a corner table, his sharp suit and composed demeanor giving him the same commanding presence he always had. He looked up as I approached, his expression unreadable. As I sat down across from him, I could feel the tension in the air, heavy, like it always had been between us. "Lucas?" he began, his voice calm, but with an edge that told me he was about to lay something important on the table. "I've been thinking a lot about what happened that night, and I want to apologize." I wasn't sure how to respond. Apologize? For what? For the years of dismissing me? For making me feel small and insignificant in his world? Or was this apology just another attempt to maintain control, to shift the narrative? "I don't need an apology, Robert," I said quietly, meeting his eyes. "What I need is to move on. I've spent too many years chasing your approval, and it's time for me to stop." He seemed taken aback by my words, the usual smugness fading from his expression. "I didn't realize it had been so difficult for you," he said, his tone shifting, almost softer. "I never intended to make you feel unimportant. That wasn't my intention." "Well, it doesn't matter anymore," I replied, feeling the anger I had buried for so long rise in my chest. "The truth is, I've been living my life based on what I thought you wanted from me. But I've come to realize that I've been living a lie. I've lost myself in all of this, trying to fit into your world, trying to fit into Emma's expectations. I can't do it anymore. I need to live for myself." Robert was silent for a moment, studying me as though seeing me for the first time. Then finally he nodded, his gaze shifting slightly. "I see," he said. "And what is it you want now, Lucas?" I took a deep breath, the weight of my words heavy but necessary. "I want to find my own path. I want to build something that's mine, something that I'm proud of, and I'm not going to let anyone, not even you, stand in my way anymore." Robert's gaze softened, and for the first time I felt a flicker of respect from him. "I don't know what the future holds for you, Lucas, but I can see that you're serious about this. You've always been a man of integrity. I won't stand in your way, but know this. Whatever you do, make sure it's what you truly want." I was stunned by his words. It wasn't the approval I had always craved, but it was something else, something more valuable. A recognition that I was no longer the person he could dismiss. I was finally standing up for myself, and that was something no one could take away from me. As I left the cafe, I felt lighter, as though a part of the weight I had been carrying for so long had been lifted. I didn't know where this new journey would take me, but for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was heading in the right direction. And that, in itself, was enough. In life, it's essential to prioritize your own values and dreams over the expectations of others. Too often, we find ourselves living for someone else's approval, whether it's from family, a partner, or society. The truth is, true fulfillment comes from being authentic and true to yourself. Don't be afraid to step away from situations or relationships that make you feel small or unappreciated. Embrace the uncertainty of finding your own path, because it's only when you choose to live for yourself that you'll truly discover your purpose and build a life you're proud of.